Hi, everybody. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas, Texas on Saturday, April the 12th. And welcome to our commentary. Absolutely beautiful day here in North Texas. I mean, it's just absolutely beautiful spring day. And if you can go outside this afternoon, you're not going to regret it. I mean, just perfect weather here. I'm not sure what the temperatures are. In fact, let me do a quick check because I'm curious. Let me just do a quick check. The temperature like 79, a little warmer than I thought it was. But anyway, it's just absolutely gorgeous out there. If you're going to go out for anything, this would be a good day to do it. I have a post over at the American Thinker today talking about James Carville. Now, some of you remember Carville. He's been around for 30 years at least. He was the author of that famous line by, well, I guess by him, the author of that famous line, it's the economy, stupid, going back to 1992. He was one of the people who worked with Bill Clinton in 1992 in that election. And he came up with that line, as I said, the economy, stupid. Well, Carville has been in and out of favor, I think, with the Democrat Party. I think sometimes he gets too much credit, I think. In other words, because I think Ross Perot had more to do with Bill Clinton being elected in 1992 than Carville or whatever his electoral team had to do with it. I mean, Ross Perot clearly helped Bill Clinton win in 1992. But nevertheless, Carville has been around, and you see him a lot on TV. And here lately, he's been going after the Democrat Party over identity politics. And, came out again saying that we Democrats don't care about that. And, we have to focus on looking for good people. He's a big fan of Democrats from purple states, as he likes to call them, from swing states. Like I think he's a huge fan of Shapiro in Pennsylvania. He's a huge fan of Bashir in Kentucky, and he picks Democrats that he thinks are going to have an easier time winning, and most of them are not your AOC type Democrats. So he's been fighting the Democrat Party over identity politics now for quite some time. The problem is he's not winning. And I mean, I understand where Carville is coming from. He's right, really, if you think about it. Identity politics has killed the Democrat Party. So he's right in what he's saying, but nobody's listening. It doesn't look like anybody's listening in the Democrat Party. As I write in my article, the party is still going down this road of identity politics. There's really nothing that I've seen. I mean, if you're a Democrat like Carville and you think identity politics is killing your party, can you tell me an example of where the party's changing? It seems like they're doubling down on identity politics. All they do is talk about Trump, it seems like, in that party. So, good try, I guess, to Carville for pointing out the obvious, but it doesn't seem to be working. I mean, it's clearly not working at all in the Democrat Party because they're not. I mean, they're still. I mean, they're basically in denial, as they say, about what happened in 2024. They think that the reason they lost in 2024 is because they didn't say Trump. They didn't say enough bad things about Trump, and that's why they lost. They couldn't get enough Trump hatred going, and that's why they lost. And of course, they're wrong. That's not why they lost. They lost because number one, they had a very bad candidate who didn't run a very good campaign at all. And they ran, of course, in the backdrop of the Biden presidency, which was a disaster for the Democrats. So, Carville, good luck, James Carville, but you're not scoring a lot of points. I can tell you that within the Democrat Party, when people like me are agreeing with him, but Democrats are apparently not, at least not enough of them to make a difference. I have a post coming out Sunday morning about climate change. And it was inspired by an article that came out by a fellow named Joel Kotkin, Kotkin, Kotkin. And you can see his work in the internet. He's written, I think he writes for a website, or I know at one time he used to write for a newspaper in Orange County, which is, of course, Anaheim and in the LA area. And he's writing an article talking about how climate change is changing, meaning more and more people are having second thoughts about climate change, at least in the implementation of policies, whether it's shutting down power plants or implementing the Green Deal and all this kind of stuff. It's simply not working. And you're looking at Europe right now. Look at the mess that they have in Europe. They've shut down some power plants, and now they don't have they don't have enough energy. And look at the Paris Climate Change Accord. I mean, that it seemed like everybody wanted to sign that. Certainly, President Obama did. Thankfully, President Trump took us out of that stupid deal. But the reality is that the Paris Climate Change Accords didn't do anything because you cannot have. First of all, it didn't have any enforcement. How can you have a treaty that doesn't have enforcement? How can you have an agreement between countries that can never be enforced? You don't know who's violating it, in other words, because you have no way of punishing the violators. So it doesn't include China, or at least China is not treated the same way. All kinds of exceptions for China and India, the two countries that are frankly polluting the air more than anybody else. We're not the problem. The United States is not the problem. We have cleaner air, and we are more environmentalist concerned over here than they are in China and India and so on. So that whole Paris climate thing, it's the Paris climate change thing went down the drain real fast because there's nothing there. There's nothing to that agreement other than just a bunch of people who want to feel good about themselves. But there's nothing. There's nothing to that agreement because it doesn't have any enforcement. So anyway, I think what you're seeing is the failure of these policies in many countries, but you're also seeing the failure of the people who are promoting these ideas because they keep making bad predictions. And in my post, I list 10 of their predictions. There's so many of them, but 10 of them, like global warming, global cooling, and that we were going to run out of water, and the Arctic Ocean was going to run out of ice, and New York City was supposed to be underwater in 2015, and all these dire predictions that never came true. They never came true because they weren't true. They were just crazy predictions being made by people who had other objectives. They had different objectives. They weren't really interested in the climate. They were just interested in other things. And they used the climate to gain control over our lives and over what we could do with our lives, what kind of car we could drive. I mean, the electric vehicle thing is a good example of this. Electric vehicles are good. I have no problem with them. If you want to have one, that's great. But the reality is that an electric car has to be charged. Where do you think they're charging it from? From a power plant. So you still need fossil fuels, but these people declared war on fossil fuels as if we could just do away with fossil fuels and never have to worry about it. Well, that's completely unrealistic. So all of this fantasy of climate change is hitting reality, and reality is very harsh, as everybody knows. So now all of a sudden, a lot of these countries are pulling back. Here in the United States, I mean, we thought we could build all these charging stations for electric cars. We didn't even come through with that. And more and more people are just looking at all this Green New Deal and saying, "Hey, come on, guys, let's reconsider this." Now, that doesn't mean that we don't care about the environment. That doesn't mean that we don't try to clean our environment. That doesn't mean that we are not good protectors of the environment. Of course, we are, but not by pushing all these crazy policies that ended up sending all these jobs to China, frankly, and to the third world, because they were manufacturing without any concern for the environment, and there was nothing we could do about it. That's the other thing. Again, because of this stupid Paris climate change accords, there are nothing you can do to countries that violate the agreement. So a bunch of countries were living up to it, I guess, but the people who weren't, or the people who didn't care, there were nothing in the agreement to go after them. So I think you're seeing a change. You're seeing a change. It's a good change. It's a good change. People are beginning to realize that a lot of these crazy ideas were just that. They were just crazy. And that you're not going to gain anything by shutting down industry or by, forcing everybody into an electric car that, first of all, we cannot afford. Number two, we don't have enough charging stations. And number three, it has to be charged by a power plant. So what are we getting out of this? Nothing, to say the least, nothing. So there's a change, and I talk about this in my post on Sunday morning. Check it out. Well, a couple of things on this day in history. 1945, President Roosevelt passed away, and Harry Truman, Vice President Truman, became president. I don't think there has ever been a change like that one before, because we were in the middle of two wars: the war in the Pacific and the war in Europe. And even though both wars were going the American way, it was still a very risky time. And very few people knew who President Truman was. He was a completely unknown figure. Honestly, except for the people of Missouri, where he was a senator from, most of the other people in the country really didn't know who he was. So he had to make a lot of very tough decisions very quickly as president. He had to oversee of course, the peace in Europe, and he had to oversee the end of the war in Japan. And he had to make the decision about dropping the atomic bombs. And then, of course, the containment policy against communism in Europe. It was President Truman who created NATO and created the containment policy against communism that was pretty much our foreign policy until the collapse of the Soviet Union. So a big day in American history when FDR passed away. And FDR, of course, was a giant politically, having won 4 consecutive elections. And the ball passed to a very unknown man, Harry Truman, who lived up to the job. He really is regarded today as a good president because he met the challenge and he did a good job with it. So big day in the country today in 1945, the death of FDR, who had been a very sick man for some time, and the new president, Harry Truman, who honestly much of the country didn't know anything about. And also on this day in 1961, in the war, or in the space race, as they like to call it, the Soviets made it to space for the first time. Yuri Gagarin, a cosmonaut, as they used to call these people in the Soviet Union, he was in space on this day. I don't know how long he was up there, not very long, I assume. But Yuri Gagarin became the first man to go into space. I don't know what happened to him after that. I think he probably, I'm sure, became a famous man in the Soviet Union. But I did read a few years ago that he had been killed in a plane accident. I don't know when, but he was killed in a plane accident a few years after his famous ride into space. So he became the first man to go into space. Soviet Yuri Gagarin. Of course, the first American man was John Glenn, and that was a little bit later. So have a great weekend, everybody. We'll come back on Sunday night. I think we're going to chat with my friend George Rodriguez. We got a lot of local stuff to get into here in Texas, so we'll chat with him. I guess the big story in Texas is that Attorney General Paxton is going to challenge Senator Cornyn in the primary for the Senate in 2026. And that's going to be the story. That's going to be the election night outcome that everybody's going to be looking for. So that Republican primary, the turnout should be huge in 2026 between those two men, Attorney General Paxton and, of course, Senator Cornyn. I think Cornyn is going to win. That's my prediction, but we're way ahead of that at the moment. But we'll talk to George and a few other things on Sunday nights going on in Texas. Thank you for listening. Have a great Saturday night, everybody. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas.